called UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial and Development Organization. It was signed, strangely enough, in Lima in Peru. And basically it said this: the third world is collapsing under debt, and the reason it is collapsing is because the big industrial nations of the West have been too fat and greedy and have got too big a slice of the cake. Therefore, we're going to ask those industrial nations to sign an agreement that they will wind down their own industries and transfer technology across into third world countries so that they can begin to produce what nations like Australia used to produce themselves, and then we'll give them preferred nation status in exporting back inside those countries. Now, can you believe that an Australian government would sign a document which says we wind our own industries down and give another nation the chance to sell us back the stuff that we used to produce ourselves? But we signed that. Whitlam signed it, and the man who pushed it harder and further than anybody else was a guy called Malcolm Fraser, who was making speeches all around the world on the need for the common fund. And if you want to see it in documented form, there is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. By this time it was under UNCTAD, an international code of conduct on transfer of technology. The whole story is in there, officially documented book. So we've wrecked our industries, and we're wrecking them even faster. And as a result of this, taxes have gone up, debt has gone up, and interest rates, well, perhaps you haven't noticed it up here, but interest rates have gone up too. And you can find farmers out in the bush paying up to 27% interest. Every time they get into trouble and move into a new risk factor, the interest rate goes up instead of down to try and keep them on their feet. And the result is there's absolute chaos now in rural Australia, and we're going to see that hitting the cities with increasing violence over the next 6 to 8 to 12 months. Hundreds and hundreds of industries will go and jobs will disappear. Not because we can't produce, not because Australians are bludgers and can't compete with Southeast Asia, which is the story being spun at us the whole time, but simply because we have been deliberately put under penalties which make it impossible to survive however good you are, and then accused of being inefficient when you can't keep up. And that's how the game is played. And ultimately, at some point, they will say, well, the only way to solve that is to try and bring in this new world order. Now, how does that then tie in with the Gulf War? When we sent our mighty armed forces over to prop up George Bush in the Middle East, it produced two problems for Mr. Hawke. The first was that the peace movement got its act together and we began to see peace protests, which became quite big. The second thing was, much more serious for him, it split the Labour Party. And there was a big section in the Labour Party did not like the idea of simply wagging its tail every time the Americans whistled. And finally, at the very time he needed national unity to try and preserve some sort of impact overseas, Bob Hawke called together the Labour Party. The argument he used was not, we've got to beat Saddam Hussein, or we've got to defend oil, or this is a mighty blow for the little man, or anything like that. He simply said, do you not realize that this is part of the world order program? That's why we've all got to stick together. And the Labour left basically said, oh, we didn't realize that. All right, well then we'll back off. And finally it came out in a full page in the Australian, why Labour would go to war for the New World Order. That was the headline at the top. Why Labour would go to war for the New World Order. And it had the whole argument. I'd just like to read you the arguments of just one backbench Labour man, Dr. Andrew Theophanous. This is what he said in the House of Representatives. A new world order is emerging, as is shown by the unprecedented Resolution 678 of the United Nations Security Council. When a situation arises in which the United Nations has gained a tremendous boost in its power, in its authority, and is able to carry resolutions and concrete actions as a result of those resolutions, then people who describe themselves as leftist or socialist should not be concerned about it, but should welcome such developments, because the increase in the powers of the United Nations is a very significant development. It is something which the ALP has been committed to for many, many years, ever since the time of Dr. Evatt. And those of you that know anything about Dr. Evatt would know that he set the whole thing in motion through the Fabian Society and was in actual fact the first president of the United Nations. So that's the argument that Bob Hawke used. Now, what did Dr. Andrew Theophanous mean when he said, this is part of our program? You've got to go and have a look at this document, which is the Australian Labor Party 1982 Platform and Rules, which came in just before Bob Hawke got into power. It was no longer the old traditional Labour Party of Ben Chifley and John Curtin and Arthur Calwell and some of the great Labour men of the past, who, whatever else you say, were certainly patriotic Australians. This was a totally revamped, changed Labour Party that was now involved in a world program. And so it started off virtually on page 1 with the things that had to be done for the New World Order. The flag must be changed. We've got to get rid of the monarchy and have a republic. It's written in there. We've got to eliminate barriers against world law, such as the Senate and the Constitution. And then you swing from there and it goes straight onto it. We are now totally committed to the New World Order as part of the program of the Socialist International, with which we are affiliated. And people say the Socialist International, never heard of it. Well, you should have